This episode was originally released as a bonus episode of Real English Radio and is now being released to the public. Enjoy. What do you do for a living? It's one of the most common questions you'll get asked as an adult at social gatherings. Doesn't matter if it's a bar, a cafe, a networking event, or a family reunion. Work tends to be what occupies the majority of people's time, so naturally, this is what people will ask about when meeting each other for the first time. But as I get older, I tend to appreciate this question less and less because although it's meant to be a conversation starter, it usually has the opposite effect. A lot of people aren't particularly passionate about their jobs and therefore don't feel much pride or positive energy when talking about them. So we've already started the conversation with something that you most likely don't want to talk about. But on top of that, there's a high chance that the person who asked you the question is asking not because they're interested in your career, but because they want to know what type of box to put you in mentally. I'm talking about the kind of person who doesn't care what you do. They just want to know if you do something that's interesting to them. They want to know how much money you make. They want to know if your job is cooler than theirs, right? They want to know how much respect they should give you based on your job title. Now, I've been thinking about this topic for about a week because I recently ran into one of these people and I started thinking about entertaining ways to make those superficial conversations more interesting. But I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, today I was on Twitter and I saw a tweet about this exact topic. A content creator named Jules Turpak tweeted the following. She says, instead of asking, what do you do for work? Simply ask, what do you enjoy? If their work falls under that, it organically comes in. And if not, you just prompted a more fruitful conversation. So just in case that didn't make sense because of the words that she chose, I'll say that in plain English. Instead of asking what you do for work, simply ask, what do you enjoy? Now, if what they enjoy includes their work, then their work will naturally come into the conversation organically without it being forced, right? And if it doesn't, you still prompted a more fruitful conversation. When she says that, she's basically saying, even if you end up not speaking about their work, it's fine because by asking somebody, what do you enjoy? That conversation is going to be much more beneficial or productive or positive than starting a conversation with, what do you do for work? Right? So then after reading that tweet, I clicked on it and started reading some of the replies. And this one guy says, the question, what's your story, is pretty ambiguous, meaning open to interpretation. But that's not really what ambiguous means. Let me give you the dictionary definition. Open. Oh, yeah, it does. Open to more than one interpretation, having a double meaning. That's what I'm thinking. It's like it can be interpreted in this way or that way. It's unclear exactly how one is supposed to interpret it. So the question, what's your story, is pretty ambiguous or open to interpretation to the extent that people can just answer how they want to be perceived. So basically what he's saying is when you ask, what's your story, it's up to the person who's responding to choose what information they want to give you or how they would like you to perceive them. But if you start by saying, what do you do for work? In most people's minds, there's only one way to answer that question, which is by saying whatever it is they do for work, you know? So let me read that again. He says, what's your story, is pretty ambiguous such that people just answer how they want to be perceived, and this has worked well for me. Other questions feel like they're dodging the real question, which is, how should I understand you as a person? Okay. Then somebody responded to that guy, and he said, my issue with this question is it comes across as trying too hard to be deep, and it unnerves people sometimes. I prefer the question, what are you into? Which is another way of asking, what do you like or what do you enjoy? Right? And maybe that wasn't clear, but the guy who responded, he's referring to the question, what's your story? He's saying, in his opinion, it's trying too hard to sound deep. It sounds a little corny, a little cheesy, like you're trying too hard to be different. Show, oh, I'm not like the normal people who ask, what do you do for work? I want to know your story. I want to go deeper. It just, in his opinion, it sounds forced. So maybe you might not want to use that question, right? And then somebody else responded by saying, replace the question, what do you do, with how do you spend your days? It produces more interesting results and is less traditional, career-centric, which is becoming less and less relevant. So he's basically saying, instead of asking about work, just ask how they spend their time, because a career-centric life is becoming less and less common as time goes on. I think millennials, I'm part of the millennial group, and I would say that this might be 50-50, 60-40 in terms of people who are just super passionate and obsessed about their careers, and other people who just work a job so they can pay bills and then use their free time to do other things. But Gen Z, um, it's hard for me to say confidently, but I just imagine that the majority of them are not really concerned with like making their career their entire identity, which is what my parents and grandparents did when they were coming up, you know? But anyway, I saw this tweet on Twitter related to this topic I've been thinking about for like a week now, and I figured I'd include it just because it's relevant to the episode. But let's move on because I've talked about giving people the benefit of the doubt before, and check out episode number 37 if you haven't already. So let me steel man the opposing view here. And just in case you don't know, when I use the verb steel man, it basically means to construct the strongest possible argument or the strongest possible version of someone's argument in an attempt to validate it before you show them why you believe it's wrong. So I'm going to try to give you an example, a very, very simple example. Let's imagine that I say the sky is blue and you say the sky is green. Instead of telling you why I think that's stupid, instead of telling you why I think that's wrong and giving you all my arguments in the best way possible, before I do that, I'm going to steel man your argument, which means I'm going to argue from your perspective. I'm going to try to make your argument even stronger, like steel. I'm going to try to take your argument and make it even better and argue against myself just to make sure we're on the same page and just to show you I'm trying to see it from your perspective. I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt because maybe I'm wrong. So let me argue against the best possible version of your argument. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense, but I left it in the vocabulary guide and you can always contact me if you got questions, okay? So getting back to what I was saying, in my opinion, the question, what do you do for a living, especially when you first meet somebody, is extremely boring and frankly a little annoying. Just doesn't really prompt productive or interesting conversations most of the time. But let me look at this from a different perspective and maybe argue for the question, what do you do for a living? Let's assume that when someone asks, what do you do? They're really asking, what should come to mind when I think of you? Because on some level, that really is what they want to know. How should I understand you as a person? Now, although for some people, this question is motivated by the instinctual desire to put you in a box based on your salary or your status or anything like that. For other people, the question could be motivated by our instinctual need to simplify and understand the world around us. Like imagine if somebody gave you a new tool or a machine that you had never seen before. Your first question might be, what is this? Or what does it do? Now, you might not necessarily be trying to assess its intrinsic value, but instead just wanting to have some idea of its purpose. Even if you never use it and it's of no value to you, at least you know what it is, right? And I could be wrong, but I think that's human nature. So when you think about it that way, the question, what do you do, becomes a bit more interesting. Because if what people want to know is what should come to mind when I think of you, then your answer can simply be based on how you want to be perceived or remembered. Because remember that most people don't really care what it is you do for a living. So there's really no need to answer the question literally if you know that there's nothing to gain from people knowing what your actual day job is. And to say that in a different way, you can make conversations more interesting or fruitful if you stop taking people's questions so literally and instead start having fun with your answers. So let me give you an example. If I'm talking to a woman at a bar and she asks me what I do for a living, I'll say something like, I'm a stripper, or I do OnlyFans. And it's a much more fun and provocative answer because it's so obviously ridiculous that it's funny. Like if you've seen me, if you know me, you know there is no fucking way that somebody's pulling out their wallet and paying me to take off my clothes and dance to provocative music. You know it's not happening. It's ridiculous, and that's why it's funny. It creates a much better opportunity for curiosity and interest to flourish because I've playfully dodged or avoided answering the question, which only increases the desire for the real answer. You see, I'm just having fun. Now I'm in a place where I can tease this woman I'm talking to. We can joke around, play and laugh. She wants to really know what I'm doing for a living and stuff like that. It's so much more interesting than what do you do for a living? I do this. Oh, that's fantastic. Right? Just have fun with it. There's no reason to answer literally if it's just a casual conversation, in a casual environment. It's not a job interview. You see what I'm saying? Or if I meet somebody here in Thailand, another example. If I meet somebody here in Thailand and they ask me what I do, I'll say that I'm a podcaster, and then I pull out my phone and I show them my podcast. Because I know that they or someone they know could probably benefit from subscribing to my podcast. And that's what I want them to think about when they think of me. Another example. If I'm talking to someone and I get the sense that they're the superficial type, right? Where I'm from, we might call them plastic or fake, artificial, right? If I meet somebody like this who just wants to put me in a box based on what I do for a living, and when they ask me, what do you do for a living? I might say something like, I do many things, which is true. I do many things. And when they say, like what? Things like what? Then I can respond by saying, I can't talk about it, or I'm not authorized to talk about it. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you speak to people that way. I think it requires a certain personality, a certain level of confidence, because not everybody's going to take that the best way. But, I'll just, that last example, probably just maybe ignore that one because, our personalities are most likely a bit different, our communication styles. But you get what I'm saying. I'm just giving you examples, right? But on a more practical level, let's imagine that you want to enter a new career field. You're currently working as a dental assistant, but you really want to be a graphic designer. Instead of telling people that you're a dental assistant, just start introducing yourself as a graphic designer. Tell people what should come to mind when they think of you. It would also be wise to spend time thinking about how you might respond to potential follow-up questions, meaning the questions that they ask you after the first question to get more information. Because if you're talking to a good conversationalist who's actually interested in you, it's likely or probable that they'll want to know more than just your job title. For example, if you tell me that you're a graphic designer, without a doubt, I'm asking to see some of your work. I'm certainly going to ask you about your artistic inspiration and creative process because I'm just a curious guy and I prefer to go beyond the surface level small talk as quickly as possible. I try to learn as much as I can about people when I speak to them. So even if you've never exported a vector file in your life, you've never made one design, even if you don't have a website with your portfolio online yet or anything like that, you can tell everyone you're a graphic designer, and that's what people will remember when they think of you. And when they ask to see your work, you could say something like, you just made the switch from another career and you're in the process of building your portfolio. Or you could say that your work is for major companies, big corporations, so you can't share your work with the public, only internally with the company. Anything. Now, you might think that this is just blatant lying and therefore shameful behavior, but I would debate that because it's all contextual. There are times when conversations are serious. There are times when they're casual, competitive, routine, funny, flirtatious. And I'm saying that sometimes there's nothing wrong with having a little fun and coming up with more interesting ways to answer the same old boring questions. Especially when you're talking to people that you feel aren't really trying to get to know you anyway. Or in situations like the one I just described, where you want to be known for something, you can just start telling people to remember you for that. And you'd be surprised how that alone could be the thing that ends up launching your new career. Simply telling people you're a makeup artist because that's what you want to be. Simply telling people you're a photographer because that's what you want to be. Or simply telling people you're a programmer because that is what you want to be. I'd like to remind you that I'm making very general statements that might not apply to your current situation. And I think the concept of faking it till you make it is a topic that deserves its own episode. And just in case you don't know, To fake it till you make it basically means to act confident with a particular skill or in a particular area, even if you have no experience or knowledge in that field. Basically, pretending like you're already doing the thing, even though you've never done it. And by pretending that you've been doing it for years, by acting like you're experienced and you know what you're doing, people will see that and then naturally like want to how can I say this? They'll start treating you as if you're already at the level you're pretending to be at. I hope that makes sense. So let me pick one. What did I say? Photographer, makeup artist. Let's say you're a photographer. You want to be a photographer. Just faking it till you make it. That's probably not the best example. Photographer. Um, Rappers do this all. This is the perfect example. Rappers do this all the fucking time. So a lot of rappers will talk about money and jewelry and beautiful women and fancy cars and just living that lavish luxury lifestyle in their songs, even though they're still working at the local restaurant part time, delivering for Uber Eats on the weekends, doing everything they can just to make money and pay bills. But they're dreaming of being a rapper. They aspire to be a rapper. But in their songs, they're talking as if they're already living that rich and famous lifestyle. They're faking it in the songs. And by doing that, people listen to the songs, they like the songs, they share the songs. The artist starts to make money because of that. And then over time, he actually gets the money to live that lifestyle he was talking about all those years in his songs, back when he was working at fucking McDonald's. He faked it until he made it. And to make it means to be successful in this context. So fake it, pretend that you're successful until you actually become successful. That's really a simple way of saying the same thing, right? So I'm just saying the concept of faking it until you make it definitely deserves its own episode. But I really hope you can get the point. And just in case you don't, let me reiterate. What are the main takeaways from this episode? The first one, in my humble opinion, asking people what you do for a living or what they do for a living, there's not anything inherently wrong with the question. I just think when you don't know the person very well, you're making small talk, you're trying to get the juices flowing to get into a more interesting conversation. What you do for a living tends to be a pretty boring question that ends up killing the conversation for all the reasons I mentioned earlier in the episode. So you can ask that question, but maybe have a plan on where to take it after you ask that question. I don't know. But what I would recommend is just ask more interesting questions. That's what I would recommend. And we can talk about maybe different questions or approaches to starting and maintaining conversations in future episodes. I know I talk a lot about improving your communication skills. I've done an episode about the art of conversation, but I haven't gotten too deep into the actual tactics and things that I've learned to do over time that help me maintain conversations with literally anybody. You know, I made a couple of YouTube videos about it, but like taking everything that I just know intuitively in my head and putting it on paper or in an episode in a clearly defined, formatted structure for you to easily consume, it just takes time. So, but I would like to do that instead of just like rambling here in circles without really getting to the point. So 5 fucking minutes later, baking it until you make baking it until you make it is a topic that deserves its own episode. And the first takeaway that I want you to remember from this is consider asking more interesting questions. Maybe try to see how long you can go in a conversation with a stranger without asking what they do for a living. Just try that for a few weeks, a month, right? And the second takeaway, even more important, arguably, is when people ask you boring questions. What do you do for a living? How much money do you make? Or fucking, I don't know, whatever other boring shit we tend to ask each other. When people ask you questions like this, consider just giving more playful answers. Have fun with it. All right. There's no reason to take everything so seriously, so literally, when you know it's just a casual conversation with a stranger. And of course, you can always make the conversation serious. You can always take it in different directions. But I find much more success when I see how much fun I can have talking to this person. Right? Because the majority of my life, I've been a pretty serious dude, taking everything and everyone, including myself, a bit too seriously. And it's not necessarily the best approach for casual conversations with people you don't know very well. I think I used to be a pretty boring guy. to talk to. And once I realized that, I just, again, I've talked about it on the podcast before. I started studying communication, trying to learn about the art of conversation, putting this into practice and learning how to talk to people. And I've definitely had more success just trying to have fun with people, not taking things too serious, teasing people, being a little more provocative, thinking before I answer questions. You know what I mean? This, again, I probably said this recently. We could talk for weeks about communication and conversation skills. We really could. So I guess I'll leave that for another day. But again, the main takeaways: ask more interesting questions. And when people ask you boring questions, give more interesting answers. Just have fun with it. Don't take it too literally. All right. But I'm also curious to know, before I get out of here, what do y'all think about this? Because I find that no matter the language or the culture or the country, this is a universal question, right? What do you do for a living? We all ask strangers this question when we meet them because we don't know what else to talk about. So how do you guys feel when people ask you this question? Or do you guys tend to ask this question to strangers when you meet them for the first time? I am curious because obviously everyone has different opinions and different approaches to meeting people, making conversation, and stuff like that. So the point is just to start a conversation with y'all, as always. All right, my friend. But that's it for now, man. I'm going to get up out of here. Hopefully, you have enjoyed yet another episode of Real English Radio. Thank you so much for subscribing to the podcast and supporting my work. And I'm really glad to know that you guys are learning effectively with the vocabulary guides, the transcript, listening to each episode, asking questions and stuff like that. It's very good to know. Very good to know. And very good to have y'all support. I appreciate it. All right, y'all. But I'm going to get out of here, man. I will talk to y'all very soon. Peace.